next public comment.
Ross, you are now able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and council members. I spoke here recently about the incredible waste of time, money, and carbon emissions that is San Anselmo's participation in Flood Zone 9. The flood zone has burned through over $34 million. That is staggering. About all we've done is bought 3 properties and dug 1 hole in the ground. The staff and consulting costs in the past 13 years totals about $25 million. We have $4.2 million available in collected fees at this time, and the flood fees in the coming years will total about $23 million. The question at hand is, how much longer are we going to stand on the sidelines and watch the waste? I believe it's time to start talking about exiting Flood Zone 9. The waste cannot be ignored, and the futility of attempting to control floods is now more than apparent. The Marin County Flood Control and Water Conservation District Act was created in 1953. In 1971, San Anselmo exited the flood zone because of the ecological impact of the concrete channel, as well as wanting to avoid downstream maintenance. In 1971, the town of San Anselmo had an ecology commission, a human rights commission, a budding recycling program, and had passed a resolution against the war in Indochina. The parallels today are amazing. In 1971, the town council voted unanimously to exit the floodplain. Quotes like within those minutes are things like, "We find that the maintenance of the downstream portion of the project is of no benefit to the taxpayers of San Anselmo, and feel that we must, in protecting their interest, withdraw from the maintenance district. And the loss of the natural stream environment, woodland associations are simply a price we are unwilling to pay." I believe that in a very similar vein to 1971, the project flood control costs to date are not sound ecologically in terms of carbon emissions. And like in 1971, the taxpayers in San Anselmo should not bear any responsibility for any flood zone projects, maintenance, repair, performance, or lack of performance. I and many others feel enough is enough. We can exit the flood zone by a simple public vote. The language in the Flood Zone Act includes Clause 6826.1, withdrawal from the territory. The way that happens is a public vote. The citizens and taxpayers deserve a voice by a public vote. The town council can make this form of democracy real. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ross. Next public comment.
There are no more public comments.
All right, thank you. With that, we will close public comment and we'll bring it back to council for discussion. Steve, would you like to start us off?
Sure, I guess. Liz, thank you for the presentation, very informative, and, I guess this was just an oral presentation, so there's no action required here from council, but, I appreciate the update and certainly appreciate from hearing from our constituents. I know Kathy Schaefer's been involved for a very, very long time, as has Ross Asseltine, so, and Gerald Page. So just, I guess, at this point, wondering if there is any action that is being sought for, if this was just to receive the update.
This was just an update.
Okay, then therefore, Liz, I will thank you for the update and the information and pass it on to my colleagues.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilor?
So I too think that we're a little bit premature with much discussion. Is there a deadline, Ms. Lewis, when the town, needs to decide where we want to go with this? Or I guess, are we waiting for FEMA to even approve your proposed project?
Yeah, so thank you. That's a very good question. The next step is checking in with FEMA. We have been working with the Department of Water Resources, and they recently extended the grant timeline for this project to 2025, but they are going to want to know within the next year, the Department of Water Resources is going to want to know which direction the Flood Zone 9 is going to proceed with this project.
So is it reasonable to think you'll be back to tell us what FEMA has to say, and in the meantime, we can sort of consult our residents?
Yes.
Okay, that's really all I want to know. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Eileen. And I saw that Jackson raised a hand, so sorry, Brian, I see you're ready, but Jackson.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if there was one more hand raised for public comment. There was a flashing, and then I believe it disappeared. Please continue, Mayor.
Okay. I mean, I err on the side of leniency because Zoom is Zoom, and we're in a weird state. So if you are a flashing member of the public raising your Zoom hand, you have 3 minutes. Thank you. It looks like it might be Ann Politzer who's looking to speak.
Ann, you are now able to unmute yourself.
Trying. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Hi. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Ms. Lewis. I just wanted to comment on the current proposal for the removal of the platform and the insertion of a baffle. As I know that that's the thing that's pending. I don't think, since it doesn't benefit the downstream people or the upstream people, that it's something that the town should be doing, because it does, tamper with the creek, even though it supposedly will not change the downstream water flow. At the last meeting that Stetson was present at, they even said, well, we can't guarantee this is actually going to work. So it seems like the big push to do that right now is to not waste the $4.2 million, which is a good thought. But in that $4.2 million is earmarked not only for flood mitigation, but to improve the park and get a cool. We already have a cool park. It was the side benefit of removing the buildings from the platform. Since the baffle is not mitigation, and that's what this money is for, I don't see why we should put it in and tamper with the creek and potentially cause any issue for the downstream properties. And I think it would be responsible governance to keep that in mind, and irresponsible governance not to. And I think one of the assumptions here is that if there's an issue, the town of Ross might be the ones to step up and sue. And I don't think that that's the way things should be run with neighbors. Also, I was just looking at the second proposal where the platform is given or basically bought by the town of San Anselmo. Wouldn't that leave us holding the bag for all liability, not just in terms of the shoring up an old bridge, but anything that happens downstream? I don't know why we'd want to do that when this was initiated by the flood district and not specifically the town. And as far as I understand it, the flood district is all landowners within the flood district. So I would just, when this, because I know this is coming up, that this 4.2 million sunsets in December, I would urge you not to put the baffle in and not to remove the platform, and to use all of the work that you've done, that Brian Colbert has done and the town has done toward coming up with a great design for RHAA, to tweak that in accordance with what the people of the town want, and to continue your search for outside donors to make that happen. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
I see no more hands. Oh.
So the first one was a tech glitch, so I was lenient, but the public comment is closed, barring tech glitches. All right, thank you. Councilmember Colbert, I believe the floor is yours.
Thank you, Liz, can we just drill down on a few things that you said? So you referenced that the grant has been extended for another year. So I guess my question is that, for purposes of clarity, is that the grant that would in fact fund the baffle? What would those funds be tied to?
That's the funding that includes the baffle, the stabilization of the park, the slope stabilization, the revegetation, everything associated with removal of the building bridge too.
Got it. And so when you say it's been extended by a year, I know you're always in negotiation with the state, but we're sort of talking at least mid 2023 or the end of 2023, right? So and that grant has been extended numerous times, correct?
Yeah, recently they've just extended it legislatively through 2025. That's my understanding.
Okay, so there's no real, unfortunately, there's no real pressure right now. Those funds are sort of being held for us because they've already been earmarked for us, correct?
That's correct. We are having negotiations with the Department of Water Resources grant manager. So at some point they will want a timeline and a decision, presumably sometime towards the end of this year, as to the disposition of this project.
Okay. And then my next question goes to liability. So right now, just to recap, the property is held by Flood Zone 9, correct?
That's correct.
So the liability would then rest with the flood district as property holder?
The Flood Zone 9 is the property owner.
Okay, so if in fact we get to whatever inflection point comes, the town would be in a position to evaluate whether or not it would accept the transfer of the property, and if it was comfortable or not comfortable with whatever the attendant liabilities would be, if and when that moment comes, correct?
Just like the agreement that we had with the town of San Anselmo for the demolition of the buildings on top of the building bridge, similarly, the Flood Zone 9 and the town of San Anselmo would negotiate some type of an agreement for however the property is, whether it's to remain with Flood Zone 9 or whether it's to go with the town of San Anselmo to return to the town.
Okay. That's all. Hey, Liz, thanks again for the presentation and answering all these questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. I'll just piggyback on that indemnification question. When you say that there would be negotiations, what could we expect? Because my recollection is that there wasn't a tremendous amount of negotiation in spring of 2020 when the building did come down. That was a sticking point for a couple of council members, myself included.
So we have an existing agreement. The Flood Zone 9 Flood Zone District has an agreement with the town of San Anselmo. It was that agreement that we brought before your council for the removal, for the demolition, for the project as it's currently scoped.
Okay, so it would be deferring to the established agreement.
That's correct, Mayor. We would come back to your council with a revised agreement of some sort.
Thank you. So this kind of was a combination of discussion with some questions of Liz. And Liz, we do appreciate your time and your expertise. I'm wondering if there's any appetite at the council level for making, we're not in a position to make any sort of decision tonight. It's not what the agenda item calls for. But if we wanted to study the options more carefully and with opportunity for more public input, and I'll recommend one of the options. If there's interest in that, I think probably the appropriate step at this point would be to provide direction to staff as to what that interest is, or we will simply close out the item and thank Liz for her time. Brian?
No, I don't know if our staff is in position to provide direction, but I would offer the following for commentary and discussion from my council members. I would reiterate my request, and Liz already said she would, for Liz to work with our Department of Public Works to provide a budget for public consumption. I think that would be a helpful conversation for the community. I think it would be interesting, and I again defer to staff, simply to memorialize not necessarily every meeting, but the whole idea of where we stand with FEMA and their resolution discussion of the no-rise, I think that's going to be a major inflection point about how we might move forward. Similarly, I think it's important that we just convey to the public the state of the grants, because we continually hear about the grant and where we're at. I think if that were to come back to us packaged, along with the conversation of baffles, the then Mayor Feynman, we as a council might really be in a position to communicate with our constituents and have sort of a more informed discussion. That, along with the slides that Liz provided tonight. I offer that as for discussion to council and as a possible roadmap.
So I agree with both of those, Brian, but I have heard from enough residents that I would also like us to look at whether we want to stay in flood zone 9. It is a substantial expense to our residents, and I'm not sure we are getting the mitigation we hoped we would, and whether we want to continue down that path. And I do think we should make this more a public discussion. Ford is on the Flood Zone 9 committee, and he's not here. So I think it's a pretty big issue, not just related to these baffles, but kind of where we're headed related to Flood Zone 9. And I think that we might make that more public. And maybe staff can just come up with a survey at the very least.
I guess my question is, what would the survey? Do we have enough to inform the public for the survey? I'm not opposed to it by any means, but I guess, do we have enough information yet to package to the public for the survey? That's sort of my question. Will we have more after we have the financials and we know where the FEMA flood rise is? Are there just a few gaps in our information to engage with the public? That's just my question.
I agree that the budget is part of that, of how much we've spent, what we've gotten out of it, what's proposed now, and what benefit it provides to residents, if any. I think those are all valid questions that I think should go to the public before we make any decisions.
Thanks, Eileen. I'll just jump in. Brian, I agree with the direction and the that you outlined, and what needs to come before council and staff. I think it's fair and reasonable to talk about what a flood zone 9 exit would look like. I'm not in favor of a survey at this time because I think there just needs to be more baseline information. And are we talking about a survey monkey? Are we talking about a formal survey? And polling. I think it's just premature. But I think that the community deserves a holistic representation of the status of flood mitigation in town as it relates to this project and more generally. Vice Roberto, any thoughts?
What's the question?
Any thoughts on that's a great question.
I mean, seriously, this is a discussion item. We're having a discussion. I agree with Eileen's point that our representative on Flood Zone 9 isn't here. So, no, I don't have anything further at this point.
So maybe the sense is we have staff sort of package some stuff up. Our representative from Flood Zone 9 comes back, and then we come back and see what the next steps are before we have staff churn some stuff through.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable. Dave, how does that sound on your end? Or I should say, and also Sean as our...
Yeah, Sean and I can work on that. That makes sense, so we can talk to Liz.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all. And thanks so much, Liz. Very much appreciated. Complicated issue for many reasons.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and council members and staff. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Liz.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.